Hi, it's Emery. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to analyze demographic data with pivot tables. Pivot tables are one of the fastest, easiest ways to make sense of data. They don't require to use any formulas. You don't have to write any functions. You don't have to, heaven forbid, kind of touch your screen and manually tally up how many entries there are. Excel does all the heavy lifting for you. They are a win-win and they're very, very fast to use. So we're going to look at demographic data in this video. Demographic data is things like ID numbers of fictional people, staff members at your organization or community members that you work with, whoever that you're studying, gender, age, household income, work setting, years of experience, city, state, and zip code. Okay, so step one, we have to do a little bit of pre-work, a little bit of planning. We're going to organize the spreadsheet. I like to do 4 different things when I organize my spreadsheet. The first thing is to freeze the top few rows so they stay in view even as I scroll down. So check out what happens as I scroll down through my spreadsheet. Do you see how the column headers disappear, which gets a little confusing? It takes a lot of mental energy to memorize what's in each column. Some of them are obvious, like gender, but then you get to things like later on, especially if you have a really wide data set, lots and lots of data. You don't want to have to memorize that. Way too much mental energy. So if we want to freeze rows 1, 2, 3, and 4, this is a little bit counterintuitive. You have to click one row down from that. So row 5, which freezes everything up above it. Okay, so I've got row 5 selected. I just clicked on a little 5 off to the left. Right now I'm on the Home tab. I go up to the View tab and I go to the icon that says Freeze Panes. I click on the down arrow and I go to the first option there that says Freeze Panes. So this time as I scroll, do you see how the column headers stay in view? Pretty nice. Really easy trick. Keeps you organized. The next thing I like to do to stay organized is to insert filters to make my data easier to sort. Sort it A to Z or Z to A, smallest to largest, largest to smallest. To insert filters, you click on the row that contains your column headers or your variable names, which is row 4 in this case. That's where the filters should go. Go up to the Home tab. Go over to the right, keep going, keep going, keep going, all the way to the right, and go to the button that says Sort and Filter. You click the down arrow, you select Filter off that list. You're going to see tiny squares with tiny triangles inside them, and click on them and explore them. So I'm clicking on ID right now on this little down arrow, and if I sort IDs smallest to largest, then they go in order. Person 102 is at the top, then 101, then 102, then 103. You could sort by gender. I click the down arrow right there. If I sort A to Z, I see the females at the top. You scroll down, then the males are at the bottom. You could also filter, meaning you get to zoom in and just look at a subset of your numbers. So if I click on that little down arrow again beside gender, I can see that right now everything is selected. It says select all. So you could look at, let's say, just the males. So I just uncheck the female box, hit OK. The females are not deleted, they're just hidden from view temporarily. And you'll notice that the actual icon changes shape a little bit. It truly looks like a sieve shape right now, rather than just being that regular old triangle. You can get the females back again by simply clicking on that arrow, or now it's a sieve picture, and you click select all, and now they're going to appear again. The third thing I like to do to organize my spreadsheet is to resize the columns. Right now the columns are a little bit narrow. They're just a little too smushy. Sometimes they get so narrow that the words and numbers actually get cut off. So if somebody sends you a spreadsheet and it just looks too condensed, you might want to widen your columns up to make it easier on your eyes. There are 2 ways to resize your columns. The first way is to make all of the columns the same width. So to make them the same width, you highlight your columns. So you just click A all the way over to I, make sure everything is selected. Everything that you want to be the same width is selected. And then you hover your mouse in between some of the letters. So there's a little gray line in between H and I that I'm hovered over. And then you can widen the columns or you can shrink the columns simply by dragging that little line to the right or to the left. So now they're all equally spaced. Another option is hover your mouse over that little gray line one more time, so I'm between H and I, and you double click while your mouse is there. And now Excel auto sizes the columns to fit the contents. So column A is unnecessarily wide because it's got this really long URL, the blog post that accompanies this video, in there, so it made that wide enough. It's column B for gender, it's a little bit narrower, age is even narrower, and so on. So usually I do kind of some combination. I'll usually do this where they're auto fit to the contents, and then I manually drag, one or two columns as needed to get the look and feel just right. Sometimes if you have a really wide spreadsheet, I worked on one recently, we had 100 or 200 variables. It was crazy. I was looking at 10 years worth of data, lots and lots of variables. So we wanted to make sure all of the columns were really narrow, kind of like this, just so we could scroll right and left and get more of a bird's eye view. But then some of the values started to get, like this is a little too narrow. Household incomes got cut off. Then sometimes your words disappear. So this is where I'll wrap text often. So if I want to wrap just this row, I click on just row 4, go up to the Home tab, go to wrap text. And now I can see years of experience or work setting or household income a little bit easier. So this is all up to you. You may freeze your panes, you may insert filters, you may resize your columns, you may wrap your text, whatever it takes for you to feel comfortable and familiar with your spreadsheet before you insert your pivot tables. Okay, that's step 1, organize. Step 2, ensure that pivot table prerequisites are met. There are really only 2 major prerequisites that you need to know about. The first is that every column needs to have a label. This one's good. We've got labels for ID, for gender, for age, for household income. You will get an error message if you accidentally delete one of your variable names, or you've inserted a new column, for a new variable, you're recoding a variable, or you're adding to your spreadsheet later, and if you don't name it, if you just are moving too fast and forget, you will get an error message. So you must have, let me undo this, get the word gender back. You must have a label on top of all of your columns. The next prerequisite is that you need contiguous cells for your pivot table to work. Contiguous is a fancy word that means touching or sharing a border or sharing an outline, like the contiguous 48 states, they're all touching. In your spreadsheet, what this means is you cannot have totally empty columns or totally empty rows. So if you, let's say I'm going to insert a new column in between G and H and you forget about it, maybe you hide that column later, you were going to do something with that column and you didn't get around to it, you hid it. Excel gets very confused because what it does is it starts in the upper left corner of your spreadsheet, like cell A4 in this case, and it goes across until it reaches a totally empty column, and then it says, okay, your spreadsheet must be finished, let's just cut off here, and it's going to ignore I and J altogether. So you can't have a totally empty column. Let me hit undo again to get rid of column H. And you also cannot have a totally empty row. So you cannot have this. Let's say you had, let's say person 109.5, and you just didn't have any data on them. That's fine. That's not a completely empty row. It's just a row where you're missing information, which is normal. That happens in real life data sets. You have at least one entry on that row so Excel doesn't get confused, because again, what it does is it starts in the upper left corner and Excel goes over to the right until it kind of falls off the end of the earth, falls off the cliff, and it says, okay, your spreadsheet stops. There's nothing in J, we're stopping. And it also starts in that upper left corner and it goes down until it finds a totally empty row, which in this case, you want it to keep hunting for information. You want it to keep tallying and keep pulling from the numbers all the way in this spreadsheet down to 106. That's where it truly ends. Okay, so make sure every column is labeled. Make sure you have contiguous cells. Step 3, we're going to insert a brand new pivot table. So to insert a pivot table, you click on the upper left corner. That's kind of the starting point of your spreadsheet. And you go to the Insert tab and you click on the icon for pivot table. You get a very scary pop-up window. You get to ignore this. All you need to do is a quick skim and just make sure that Excel has circled your entire spreadsheet that matters. And this is where it's hunting. It's going over to the side and it's going down until it falls off a cliff. So you want to make sure that it's got everything encapsulated that you care about. You get to choose where you want your new pivot table to be placed. I usually go with new worksheet. Sometimes people layer a lot of pivot tables in one sheet, especially to make dashboards that update automatically or to make interactive dashboards. They'll put like one pivot table here and another one over here and another one over here and another one over here. But 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to keep the settings exactly how they are, not touch this window at all, just hit OK. All right, so you get a brand new pivot table. It opened up in sheet 1. It's empty right now. That's why it kind of looks a little funny. This is a funny window for people to look at for the very first time. Let's stay organized. That's the theme for today, organization. I'm going to rename sheet 1 as pivot. So just right-clicking on sheet 1, go to rename, call this pivot so I know where it is. I also like to drag my sheets so that they're in the order that I'm doing my analysis. So I like my data first, the demographic data, and then the pivot data, the pivot sheet second, and then usually I'll make my graphs in the third sheet and so on. So I'm following my logical order, and somebody else can recreate my steps if they need to a lot easier. Or at least me, future Anne, could look back at this in 12 months or even 12 years and just do it the same way every time. It's very methodical, very neat, very organized. My pivot table fields have disappeared. That's okay. I'm just going to click on this rectangle and they show up again. Okay, step 4, let's navigate the pivot table, get familiar with what's in here a little bit more. So there are a few jargony terms off to the right. So the first area is this pivot table fields list. It looks like just a mess of words. It's really easy though. Let me show you what's in there. So if you go back to the regular spreadsheet, the variables here are ID, gender, age, household income. Those are the same variables that show up in your list in the upper right of your pivot table sheet. ID, gender, age, household income. This is your bank of variables that you have to play with in your pivot table. You can drag and drop them in a minute. This fictional data set is intentionally very short so it doesn't feel overwhelming, but in real life you might have 20 variables corresponding to the 20 columns in your spreadsheet. You might have 120 corresponding to the 120 columns. This is where choosing nice terms and words and phrasing at the beginning is going to help you with your pivot table later so you know what's what and which variable you need. Rows, the rows box is what's going to be listed down your table. So those rows will go across. It'll make more sense when we actually drag and drop in a second. Columns, those variables will be listed along the top of your table, and then the contents will go downwards in the columns of your table. Values is what's going to go in the inside body of your table. That's usually going to be ID number, especially for this data set. That's the people you want to tally by. You want to know how many people fit this criteria, like is this person and this person and this person and this person all tallied up together. And then filters are just like the filters that we already inserted in the raw spreadsheet. They allow you to zoom in and just look at a subset of your data at a time. Okay, step 5, let's run some frequencies. Let's figure out how many people fell into each of these criteria. So how many males and females we have, how many people of different ages, how many people of different household incomes. Okay, so for starters, I'm going to drag ID into values. So I'm just clicking on it, pulling it down there. Excel right off the bat gives you a sum. It's summing by ID numbers. So it's saying that there are 15,240 people in the spreadsheet. There are not that many people. There's 100 and some people in this spreadsheet. So this is what Excel is doing. It's saying person 168 plus 169 plus 170 plus 171 rather than just saying like this person plus this person plus this person. Does that make sense? That's why we're getting a abnormally large 15,000 number. So all you have to do in these scenarios when you kind of say like, wait, what's going on? Just time out, pause, adjust the settings a little bit. So I'm clicking on this down arrow and I go to value field settings, the very kind of first thing you see. It's at the bottom of this list. And I change the sum to a count. Notice you can also do averages, you can do maxes, you can do mins, lots of choices in here. Hit OK. And then you get the true value here, which is 101 people. So that's the inner contents of our table for now. Okay, let's do some tallying. So I'm going to walk through my spreadsheet very methodically. Let's just start with gender. So I'm going to drag gender into rows and check out what happens. We have a pivot table. Okay, so gender is in rows, meaning the female, they're listed on the left side, and then there's a row for females and the row for male. 70 females, 31 males. That adds to a grand total of 101 people. You can also drag gender into columns if you want to. You're going to get the same exact answer. So now female and male are listed across the top, and there's a column going downwards for females and a column going down for males. If at any time your boxes that are off to the right disappear like mine did, no big deal. Just click anywhere in the inside of your table here and the boxes will reappear. So this is a basic pivot table, just doing one frequency at a time. You could do this for any of your other variables, like you could drag, let's do this now. You could drag work setting into rows. And now instead of just a basic frequency, we have a crosstab, a cross tabulation, which is 2 variables at one time. So out of the 7 total people who work in a college or university setting, there are 4 females and 3 males. Out of the 11 total people who work at for-profits, there are 7 females and 4 males, and so on. You can put these in any order you want. This is where you're in the driver's seat, you're in control. You get to control which variables you're looking at and how your table is configured. So let me pivot it around quickly. This is where pivot tables get their name. You could put both of your variables in the rows box. So I've got work setting up above and then gender is down below that. So then in my table, I don't know if this is the best look. This is a little like dense looking. So I've got work setting at the top and nested down below that or nested inside it is gender. So out of the 7 people who work in college or university settings, there are 4 females and 3 males. Let me reorder these a little bit. So instead of work setting being on the top, you could put work setting on the bottom. So now I've got gender listed first. So here's my female bucket. And then within there, I've got 4 people who work for colleges, 7 people work at for-profits, 19 people work in government settings, and so on, which adds up to 70 females total. You could also put one of the variables, just like we had before, in columns. So let me put gender over in columns. Then you've got females going down a column, males going down a column. You could switch it. You could put work settings in columns. You get to reorganize your spreadsheet, rotate your tables as many different ways as you want. Okay, so step 5 was frequencies, just looking at one variable at a time, males or females. Crosstabs, step 6, looking at 2 variables at a time, stacking them either both in rows, stacking them both in columns, or putting one variable in rows and one variable in columns. Step 7, let me show you how to use filters. Let's pretend that you only wanted to look at people who live in Maryland. Okay, so I'm going to drag state into the filters box. The filters show up in the first row of your spreadsheet. So right now it says state all. You can click on that little arrow, lots of filters today, and you could just look at Maryland. You can also look at multiple items at a time. You could look at just people from Maryland and Virginia and exclude DC. Again, lots of control. So let's just look at Maryland. And now, instead of 101 people total in my spreadsheet, I'm looking at just a subset of, here's my new total, 23 people. And just like before, just like the earliest filters that we added, the little icon changes shape. So instead of an arrow, it is that filtery sieve shape, just like the filter that you'd use in your kitchen for baking or cooking. You can get the other states back again, so you could just click on all, or you could do select multiple items, but that's where filters come in. I usually use filters when I want to do some type of subgroup analysis, so maybe I've got a spreadsheet of people from 2 organizations and I want to compare, company A to company B, or if I'm doing a research project, I'll compare the treatment group to the control group, or you could put variables like that in columns. Maybe you want to double stack. It gets a little confusing in columns. Maybe in rows. There are a lot of correct ways to do it. What doesn't tend to work, I don't want to say incorrect. Maybe your brain can handle this. My brain does not like looking at 3 variables at once. It just takes too much time and too much energy to be like, okay, I'm looking at state, and then I'm looking at gender, and then I'm looking at work setting. It's just too much. So usually 2 is kind of the max that I'll even present in a report or present to somebody in a slide deck or dashboard anyway. Step 8, you can also use pivot tables to explore your missing data to check out how many blank cells you have. You can check out missing data in a bunch of different ways, but pivot tables are one tool that you have available. So let's pretend for state, this is a good example. 5 people are blank. They didn't enter any state information, or, wherever we got this fictional spreadsheet from, it didn't have states for these 5 people. So it takes a lot of time, kind of a lot of time, just a couple seconds to go back to your demographics sheet and, hunt out for the missing data, or you could use your filters if you wanted to. I also like to use pivot tables for this by simply double clicking in the body of the pivot table. So I just double click on 5. And Excel opens up a brand new sheet. It's called Sheet 2 with its new name, and it just shows you those 5 entries. And then, okay, so you can see for these people, they're missing states. You could go, do some sleuthing, do some investigating, see who these 5 people are. But you need to know that any changes you make to this sheet, they're not linked to your full spreadsheet. They're not linked to your pivot tables. So this is really just for you to kind of get an at-a-glance view of what's going on, especially if you're taken by surprise that you have missing data. You're like, really? I've got 27 missing numbers? Could that be real? And you just double click and you say, yeah, that is real. Like, oh my gosh. And you kind of verify what's going on. These sheets don't really do much beyond that though. So when I'm done peeking at them, I delete them. I just click on the sheet name at the bottom and hit delete. You have to be very careful deleting things in Excel. It is permanent. You can't click the undo arrow and get back a deleted sheet. So be 110% sure that you don't need this information anymore before you delete it. Okay, delete this, get it out of the way. So what I'll often do is I'll go back to demographics. I'm like, oh man, I've got some missing data. I'm going to sort the states. Let me just look at the blanks. I'm actually going to filter the states. And okay, here's these 5 people. And because they live in Arlington and their zip code is a 22 area code, that means they live in Virginia. It's not Arlington, Texas. So I'm going to fill these in so they're not missing anymore. When you make changes to your full spreadsheet, the pivot table does not automatically update. Check out what happens. Okay, so the 5, it's still there. It still says we have 5 blanks for states. What you have to do is, make sure you're clicked in the body of your pivot table. That activates Pivot Tools, Analyze, and Design. So you just go to Analyze and you hit this refresh button right here. It kind of looks like a recycling symbol, the little green arrows going in a circle. You refresh the links between your spreadsheet and between your pivot table. And now we've got 26 people from Virginia instead of 21. There are no blanks anymore. Okay, yeah, and step 9 is refreshing data. So we've hit the end. I've got a whole worksheet handout that I've developed for this tutorial. So I'm going to make this available online, and you can also download the spreadsheet and practice on your own if you want. I'll include links to all of that. Thank you so much. I hope you learned a lot. I hope that analyzing your demographic data in the future is a lot faster and a lot easier with the aid of pivot tables.